We are indeed in some interesting times. This term, the era of a scarcity of resources, don't mean to say that philanthropy can't grow, but certainly how the money is going to get allocated, where it's going to come from, and the way in which you will receive it is definitely going to change. I was reading something recently, 30% of all charitable dollars, not charitable, 30% of the budgets of all charities come from federal and state government funds, grants, contract work, things of that nature. 30% of that money is going away in the next 5 years due to budget cuts, okay? And so that is a major funnel of money that comes to charities that in turn leverages other money. And so you just need to be cognizant that this leverage point, which are these federal dollars, are shrinking. So what that means is the competition for the remaining pot is going to get increasingly tough. And that really kind of gets to this topic of the rising tide of expectations, because one of the things, for example, that the federal government is doing, for those of you, how many of you get federal grants? Okay. You know it's a compliance nightmare, right? Most federal grants are based on compliance as the primary metric of success. Did you comply with all the things in it? That's changing. OMB has recently decided that they're going to go to more of an evidence-based approach in their grant making, which means while compliance is still important, the most important factor is going to be, did you produce outcomes that you can articulate through data and analysis that are also replicable and scalable? And the reason I know this is I went to a conference in December and I heard the woman from OMB who's responsible for this say those exact words. And so that is a big change from compliance to outcomes. We're seeing that same change coming in the private sector as well, both around grant making, but around all aspects of workplace giving and philanthropy. And this is coming from what we're calling the democratization, say that 3 times, of information and data. And that is all being aggregated and it's being provided online by a whole host of charity validators. And these are groups that some of whom you'll hear from today, like GuideStar, Great Nonprofits, the Better Business Bureau, Wise Giving Alliance, Charity Navigator. There's a proliferation of social media. And there's a whole new generation of donors and stakeholders that we relate to, particularly in the employer and corporate world, that are starting to look at you and at charities and at federations very differently than even just 3 years ago. So in short, one of the single most important funders of nonprofit programs, which is the federal government, is changing how it's distributing the limited dollars that it will now have. Another fact, giving as a percent of disposable income has not changed in 30 years. Not changed. It's hovered right around 2.2 to 2.3% annually. Okay. We're in an era now where people have less disposable income than they used to have in general at the lower end of the economic pyramid. For those of you who are raising money primarily from high net worth individuals, you might be seeing an actual surge. So those of you who have major gift programs, who are raising money through folks like myself who might be entering retirement age and thinking about planned giving, you might be surging. But for most people who raise 75% of their money from individual donors and corporations and foundations, the pie is going to get a little smaller and a little tougher to compete for. Stakeholders, donors have a whole array of online tools that are available to help them make informed decisions about how they're going to allocate these scarcer resources. And as we noted in the research, and again, you can download this online, and the primary research author is here today, Steve Greenhalgh. Steve, where are you? Right here. Steve's done a variety of research for us over a 15-year period related to workplace giving. And we've had a number of people tell us this is a real seminal piece of research that really is looking at the intersection of what corporations and employers are thinking about philanthropy and what charities are thinking about their relationships with those employers and corporations. So that's some great stuff. So because of this democratization of information and data about charities, we have these new and growing expectations related to charitable giving and to volunteering in that experience. Millennials and net natives are quickly dominating the marketplace. I read somewhere by the year 2025, the majority of people in the workforce will be millennials. I think that's the date, 2025. Just as an aside, you know, Marcia was talking about the combined federal campaign. I was at a meeting where, with staff, with Robin, last week, Partnership for Public Service, which promotes public service, and they were talking about the challenges the federal government has in recruiting new employees. Only 6% of the federal workforce is under the age of 30, as opposed to 33% of the private sector workforce, okay? 31% of all federal employees are eligible to retire in 2017. The math doesn't work, even for a smaller federal workforce, so they have some very significant just people strategy issues that are also relevant to what we're trying to do around the combined federal campaign. One of the significant new expectations that America's Charities has tracked, and for those of you who've been to our last couple membership assemblies, you know this is around this area called charity validation and charity validators. That's actually a term we've kind of coined because they're not all rating systems. I mean, GuideStar is not a rating system, whereas Better Business Bureau, Wise Giving Alliance is, and as is a Charity Navigator. But increasingly, all these groups are leaning more towards this validation of charities as meeting certain standards, and they're all different, but there's some aggregation going on, and that's partly what we want to talk about today, is helping you deal with the aggregation of that information. Increasingly, these groups, meaning GuideStar and great nonprofits and others, they're collaborating, they're sharing their data and information. I don't know if you know this, but Great Nonprofits, which is best described as Yelp for nonprofits. How many here are familiar with Great Nonprofits? Okay, you go online. Where's our Great Nonprofits representative in the room? We're going to hear more later today. So they basically provide a crowdsourcing platform for your donors and for your detractors to be able to go online and say what they want to say about their experience with your organization. I'm shorthanding it there, but that's basically it. But what a lot of you don't know is they're also the backbone for that same service for GuideStar. So you have these groups who are the charity validators who are beginning to collaborate, aggregate, and smart donors who even without that collaboration are able to extract this information very easily online. So like it or not, the charity validation environment is here. They're all laying claim to your information, either directly or indirectly. They're laying claim to your donors' attention, to your volunteers' attention. And we think that to embrace these opportunities and that in order to meet these new expectations, you need to play in the game. And hopefully today what we're going to do is help position you better for success in this era when charity validation information and the new expectations are intersecting and it'll become increasingly important. So a lot of what you're going to hear about today relates to this topic and the launch of a new program that we're creating called High Performing Charities Initiative. And I'll circle back to that again in my comments in just a minute. And part of my job is also to provide you some highlights, just go a little deeper on a couple things that Marcia didn't mention. One of them is the combined federal campaign, and as you know, it's been under a lot of stress. The CFC has issued new rules. When the CFC proposed these rules in draft form, it's now been almost 2 years ago, we were actually comfortable with the vast majority of the changes that they were recommending, but there are about 4 that we thought, and for those of you who've been reading our emails and updates, we felt were very detrimental to the campaign. And out of those 4, we were able at the end of the day to get them to change their position on 1. But 3, which again, I'm not going to go into the detail, you can read it in the email we sent out. But 3 we think are a real problem. That's the bad news. If there's good news in this, it's that OPM has promised to be open to working with all the key stakeholders in how these rules are implemented, because there is wiggle room in how they get implemented. But there's a philosophical problem we're having with the rules, which one of them is that they're hiding the cost of running the campaign from the donors. And they're doing it because they think that by telling the donors more goes directly to charity, that more donors will give. And in fact, focus groups would suggest that if you ask the question such as, wouldn't you give more if more went directly to the charity? So And that's pretty much how the question was asked. What they basically have done, though, is they've just switched where the costs to run the campaign are extracted and are hiding it from the donor. And that's really where we have a problem with what they're doing. It could be a situation where they might be successful in getting more donors to give, but in doing so being totally non-transparent in the process. And we think ultimately that's not good. And the other thing that they have done is they're changing the way that we work with you guys on the exchange of the money and the information about the campaign, which is going to make it vastly more complicated and expensive for us to execute. So we're hoping that we can have a positive impact on that. The changes don't go into effect until 2016, which means we have from now until about this time next year to make those changes that we'd like to see happen, because we have to know a year out in order to begin to tell you guys, and we can do planning. So at the end of the day, this year, though, the CFC was down 19%, okay? And on average, the average America's Charities member was down 17%. And that should be no surprise. We've been keeping you updated on that. It's actually a little better than we thought it might be. And given the fact that the campaign actually shut down 3 weeks into the campaign at the peak time and never really started back up again, it's actually amazing we raised as much as we did. And I don't say we, but the volunteers and the folks who are responsible for running the campaign. We've budgeted for next year a 10% increase over this new base. We think that's modest. I'm hopeful that it'll be more. I know all of you are in the process of beginning your budget cycles. As you begin to talk to us in that cycle about what to plug in for a projected figure, we may know more as the year goes on, as we talk more to OPM and get a better sense for what's going to happen this coming year. None of the rules have changed this year, so it should go back to exactly how it was last year. So in your packet, I think you have a copy of the e-news we sent out. So that is the summary of the rules and our opinion of them as it exists. So, and if you have questions about any of that, our expert in-house is Robin Neal. Robin's right over there, and Robin, most of you know Robin. Robin you can heap your wrath on her if you haven't met your CFC budget. She's personally responsible for everything that's gone wrong with the CFC. And no, not really. Robin does a fantastic job, and her team does a fantastic job on your behalf. So a few other things. We launched our new website on April 22nd. For those of you who get to our website, you'll see it has a whole new look, usability, feel, opportunities for you guys to drive content to the site. We're going to hear a little bit more about how that'll help you in the private sector later. On or about July 1st, we're going to be launching a new member portal for access to your data and information about campaigns. There's new advertising packages for this year's combined federal campaign, which I think is in your packet, right, Lynn? Package information there. And we're always looking for ways to amplify your voice and to reach the federal worker outside the walls of the workplace, so we're expanding that with advertising not only in the Washington Post-Express, but in the Federal Times and Metro rail cars, digital ads that are targeted within blocks of federal buildings. I think the future of having success in the combined federal campaign, which is clearly a market share battle, is going to be how we and how you market directly to federal employees outside the walls of the federal workplace. The charities that are doing very well in the CFC leverage the other advertising and public relations capacities they have so that they occur in front of the federal employee during the combined federal campaign season. Part of our job is to sit with any of you who want us to sit with you and develop a strategy that is unique to your organization by looking at and being part of your marketing and development teams that work on these kinds of things. And several charities have taken advantage of that, but many of you have not. So reach out to us so we can understand what you currently are doing and perhaps be able to help you leverage that better in the combined federal campaign. Finally, I want to circle back to the High Performing Charities Initiative, which we're actually launching today for implementation starting this fall. Our recent snapshot research and ongoing discussion with employers and gatekeepers tells us there's definitely an emerging trend and a desire to differentiate and feature charities that are aspiring to a higher level of accountability and effectiveness that's backed by data, but more importantly, or just as importantly, backed by inspirational storytelling. This wasn't the case just a couple years ago. This discussion was not happening with employers and the corporate social responsibility officers, employee engagement officers at the level it's happening now. Like I said before, both inside and outside the walls of the workplace, the donor and the stakeholders are now having access to all this charity validation information. They can go online and check out your organization on Great Nonprofits, on Better Business Bureau. They can see what your rating is on Charity Navigator, on Better Business Wise Giving Alliance. So we've created this high-performing charities initiative, which you're going to hear a lot more about later today, but here's just a quick summary. This is not a rating system. I want to say that right up top. We have not created another rating system. It's about understanding the major charity validators, their programs and their methodology, then aggregating that information and providing the tools and services to help you leverage that information to your advantage in front of your stakeholders. And so part of this initiative is helping you better position yourself for workplace giving access and exposure in workplace giving campaigns. I had said that the people responsible for these campaigns are looking at things differently. Quite frankly, they're not turning to federations for a validated group of charities anymore. I mean, we present to them a group of valid, legitimate charities, okay? And many companies still use that model. But many of these companies have people like you or me sitting in these positions who know how to leverage all these tools. And they are starting to look at issue and causal areas instead of individual charities. So things like STEM, or higher education, or women-serving organizations, or sustainability in the environment, or health and children. And what they're asking the federations to do is go out and find the best in breed in charities in those categories and put them in clusters that relate to their employee group. So if you're in the pharmaceuticals, you might have healthcare. If you're Bright Horizons Daycare, it's going to be children's and families issues. So there's a lot of that starting to happen. And I got to tell you, part of this is the rising tide of millennials who have an innate sense of social responsibility, who are beginning to populate these positions inside of companies and bring those values and those views to the companies, and you're starting to see that accelerate inside the walls of the workplace. So what we're basically doing, in addition to cause clusters, is we're actually creating two clusters. One's called the GuideStar Gold Cluster, and the other is the High Performing Charities Cluster. And I'm gonna try to explain what that means, and hopefully I do a good job, but if I don't, others today are gonna do a much better job than I might right now, but I'm gonna try. So core to the GuideStar Gold Cluster is competing your charting impact profile. How many of you have competed a charting impact profile? Okay, that's great. I think we have about 20 of our national member charities that have. And what completing that profile does, and I'm dumbing this way down because I'm dumb, it basically helps you rise up in the search engine in GuideStar when people are looking for your causal area or your charity. So charting impact, though, is a mutual program of the Better Business Wise Giving Alliance, GuideStar USA, Independent Sector. We're a collaborative partner. And so charting impact is this collaborative effort, and it really starts with answering 5 simple questions. They're very powerful questions, and you can see them up here on the screen. I'm not going to run through them. And after lunch, Kendall Joyner of Independent Sector and Lindsay Nichols of GuideStar are going to provide some details about the Charting Impact Program and how you can participate in that, which we encourage everyone to do. America's Charities, actually, we are in the final phases of completing our Charting Impact Profile. And like I said, there's 20 America's Charities members who are there. Now, the second phase of that is what we're calling the High Performing Charities Cluster, which is designed for members who want to build on their GuideStar Gold status by also leveraging Charity Navigator, Great Nonprofits, and Better Business Wise Giving Alliance ratings. Now, Richard Neustetter and Lynn Filderman are going to provide more details on that this afternoon. But essentially, it's going to create 2 clusters that we're going to start to present to the workplace of charities that fall in these categories of a higher level of commitment to meeting these new expectations. If you choose not to be in either, that's fine too. You will still be presented. But we're seeing clear evidence that people are looking for this. So we kind of stand at this intersection between your needs, what the employers are looking for. So part of our job is to try to bring you along and give you the tools and resources to get to a place where you can leverage these new expectations and not be afraid of them. And then finally, at our recent press club gathering, where we released the snapshot report. Pearl Lee, who's the founder and CEO of Great Nonprofits, and as we saw earlier, an incoming America's Charities board member, noted that rather than being intimidated by these new donor and stakeholder expectations, charities really need to embrace the opportunity to inspire greater sustained giving. So what we've tried to do is take Perla's idea and frame it into what we call the cycle of inspiration, which should come up here in a second. And this is a rudimentary graphic, but we wanted to try to put it together because what Perla said seemed to make some sense, because we don't want to make the idea of giving to charity all about data and analytics and about meeting the new expectations of charity rating bureaus and state attorney generals and the Office of Personnel Management, compliance. That stuff is all there, we got to deal with it. But she pointed out that there's a point that people get involved where they're inspired to ask questions. They're inspired to inquire about a charity, and it happens somehow from a friend or something they've read, something, and particularly with millennials who have, like my kids, who've come up with an expectation of community service in their school programming. So that inspiration leads to some form of engagement, okay? And that engagement then gets those people involved with the charity. And I like to use the analogy that in public relations, which is my background, you go through a thing called awareness equals understanding equals support. So you have to engage somebody to help them become aware. And once you're aware and you have some understanding, then you start to tell the story yourself. Okay? Then you start to ask those tough questions once you're engaged about accountability, transparency, how good is this program, how efficient, how effective, what are the outcomes? So then we get to the accountability, transparency piece of the equation. And this is just what people are starting to ask. And if they get the right answers, they become more inspired and more committed. Then they get to the really tough questions of how good's your leadership? What's your vision? Do you have good governance? So that kind of from 9 o'clock to, I'd say about from about 3 o'clock to about 8:40 or whatever time, 8 o'clock on the clock, you've got all that kind of, whatever that says is. I'm used to using my digital clock. Stop laughing at me. Whatever the heck that says up there. When you get to here, what you've done is you've got somebody who you've started to meet those new expectations. And then you have to tell them what the impact is. And impact is told not just in numbers, but in your story. And that's where you bring the emotion back in. And that's when you've got somebody who's going to be a sustained donor. But that's not the end, because you've got to start it all over again by keeping them engaged. So inspiration, storytelling, the emotion is not omitted from this equation. It's added onto, and your value add to the donor is when you can meet the new expectations. And that's really what our program is all about today. So I want to thank you for being here. And we got a beautiful day, a beautiful facility here. Take advantage of being in Washington. Take advantage of being here to ask us questions. We have lots of staff in the room. And our job is really, when you look at our last slide up here, which is our mission statement, our job, when you read that, is really to empower and sustain you to be able to raise unrestricted dollars, both inside and outside the walls of the workplace. And how we do that is changing, and the products and services and programs we bring to you to do that are changing, and you're going to hear a lot about that today. So thank you very much.